Alpha represents the excess return. And so we can start off by saying that alpha represents the excess return and by a manager. And what are the components of this alpha here? So we're saying alpha is given as expected return minus required return, where ER given expected return, then RR required return. We can also say that alpha is given as, we can also say that alpha is given as return on the portfolio minus return on the benchmark there. Where we are saying RP return on portfolio, RB return on benchmark. There. So we have just very briefly talked about what alpha is. It represents excess return earned by a manager. So alpha can be the expected return minus the required return. Expected return represents the minimum acceptable level of return. Minimum return acceptable to the portfolio manager. And required return is represents the, rather this is expected, what you expect to earn, pardon me. So this is what the manager expects to earn. So expected value, what you expect to earn. The required return is now the minimum return that the portfolio manager is willing to accept. So this formulae, alpha and alpha, it depends on the kind of information that you've been given. So this is the expected return minus required return. And in this alpha over here, we are saying it is the return on the portfolio or the excess return, the return on the portfolio minus the return on the benchmark or on the index there, if that is what you select to become a benchmark. So we can then move on and provide a description about information ratio. So because it's talking about alpha and information ratio, we can come on this other side and say that the information ratio by there is just given as the information ratio is given as the information coefficient IC times square root of breadth of the market there. So this is a measure or a measure of return of a portfolio, information ratio. And we can say that information coefficient, so the IC information coefficient there, we can provide a description on that, and it says is a measure of the manager's forecasting ability, is a measure of the manager's forecasting accuracy, and is measured as the correlation of the manager's forecasts, as the correlation of the manager's forecasts with outcomes. outcomes. So that is it for information coefficient. Information coefficient is a measure of the manager's forecasting accuracy. How accurate are they towards predicting future returns? Managers' forecasting accuracy and is measured as the correlation of the manager's forecasts with outcomes there. So that is what you're saying is information coefficient. How about the breadth of the market there? So we can say BR, breadth of the market, and we can provide a description for that and say is the number of independent forecasts of exceptional returns, exceptional returns, we can say, because we talk about the information ratio, exceptional returns per year, that the manager makes, there. So the breadth represents, the breadth of the market, that's what you're saying is represented by BR, is the number of independent forecasts of exceptional returns per year that the manager makes. So independent forecasts, how accurate are they towards predicting the future GDP, inflation, interest rates that have an impact on the hypothetical portfolio here that maybe 50 equity, 50 debt. How accurate are they in terms of forecasting the movements of the market there? Having said what information ratio is, and I can be able to probably maybe highlight, it's important for us to highlight these key formulae because these are the formulae that CASNEB usually like trying to test on. There's another formula for information ratio. So we can say information ratio, we can come on this other side, right here, ladies and gentlemen, and say that information ratio over here, but it's not usually tested so much, and that's with good reason why I've come on this other side, is given as residual return divided by the residual risk. And both of these, residual return and residual risk, are or should be computed on an annual basis, like that. So we can then probably perhaps apply an example over here, and I will read out the example for you as follows. Suppose a manager has an information coefficient of 0.1 and makes quarterly bets on 100 stocks. Part 1, compute the information ratio, and part 2, if the manager has an information ratio of 0.4, how many stocks do we need, or how many stocks are needed if the information coefficient remains the same, if the information ratio remains the same. So ladies and gentlemen, this is the solution. Let's do it over here. We obviously cannot use this formula for residual return divided by the residual risk, which are based on an annual basis. So we are going to use the information ratio formula, the other one that we already know. Information ratio is given as IC square root of breadth of the market. And of course, we provided description about the information coefficient and the breadth of the market. So we are saying that we have been provided with the information coefficient of 0.1, and we're saying that the breadth of the market, the square root of the breadth of the market represents the number of independent forecasts and how accurate those independent forecasts are. So in this case, we're talking about 100 stocks and are multiplied by 4 quarters right over there. So how much is the information ratio? So let's draw out my calculator right here. So we have, this is about 400. So the square root of 400, so the square root of 400 equals, and then we multiply that by 0.1. We get 2, the information ratio of 2. So IR is equals to 2. And it makes sense if we have 2 separate managers comparing amongst themselves. So the one with the highest information ratio should be the most sought after manager there. So the one with the highest information ratio. But in this case over here, the information ratio, when you're comparing only one scenario or one manager like that, may not really be quite meaningful. So this was part 1, and part 2 was giving us a scenario where if the manager had an information ratio of 0.4, then how many stocks are required. So we have the same formula over here. The information ratio is given as information coefficient, square root of breadth of the market there. And we're saying that the information ratio is 0.4, not this case over here. So information ratio is 0.4 is equals to the information coefficient remains the same. And how many stocks do we actually need? So the information remains the same. So we are saying 0.1 square root of BR over there like that. So how much do we actually need over here? So the first thing is to first of all divide. So we get 0.4 divided by 0.1, and then we get the square root of breadth of the market over here. So we say 0.4 divided by 0.1. Right there we get 4 is equals to square root of breadth of the market like that. And then of course we square this one because we square both sides. So it's going to be 4 squared is equals to the breadth of the market there. So we get squared, we get 16. So 16 represents the breadth of the market. So we're saying 16 stocks is what is actually needed so that we can be able to satisfy our condition of having the information ratio being 0.4. So as you can see, this is a fairly straightforward formula that you can be able to all understand. So moving over on this other side, we need to discuss about 2 other components which are very important when discussing alpha and information ratios over here, which include ex post and ex ante. So ex post and ex ante and ex ante there. So what is ex post and what is ex ante? So we can say that the ex post and ex ante mean after the event and before the event respectively. After the event and before the event respectively. Now, applied towards the investment industry, we can say that ex post returns are returns that the investor has already got from the investment. We stop there. Ex post and ex ante mean after the event, so after the event and before the event respectively. Ex post returns are returns that the investor has already got from the investment. Ex post. So ex ante, you can say ex ante is prediction. Ex ante is prediction. Is prediction of returns. Of returns that investors can get. That investors can get from a security or a company. From a security or company. That is it. Ex ante is prediction of returns that investors can get from a security or a company. That is ex ante. Ex post returns, ex ante returns there. What do we expect to get once we invest in KQ shares or Mumia Sugar shares?